And welcome back to another edition of the Tetracast. This is RPG Site's weekly podcast where we get the site staff together to talk about our favorite genre of video games. I'm the host. My name is Brian Vitale. Joining me, I've got Josh Torres.
For the last 2 months of 2022.
Adam Vitale.
Hello.
And James Galizio.
God, less than 2 months to finish as many RPGs as I can. Fuck.
Yep, that's kind of the time of year we're in. Chow had a conflict in schedule, so he won't be here this week. And yeah, it's November. This is our first podcast recording in November, and a lot of stuff has come out either this week or is slated to come out in the next couple of weeks. And I'm already kind of looking at the list of games that I feel almost like behind on, like games that I've wanted to get to this year, but then just had never. Either I didn't make the chance to get to them, or I decided to play stuff like Cold Steel 4 instead of like going back to play Soul Hackers 2 or whatever. A little bit of just being overly honest here. In this week of the podcast, we've got a few contributors on the site that are working on covering games that are releasing in the next week or two that we can't quite talk about yet. So that kind of limits what we're able to talk about this week, just beholden to some of the embargoes, because obviously we've got the Tactics Ogre remake coming out in a couple days. Even Valkyrie Elysium's coming out on PC in the next week. We've got obviously the Pokemon releases. We've got Monochrome Mobius coming out, though we might talk about that a little bit in the context of a demo that released on the Japanese PlayStation Store. So this week it's going to be talking about some of the games that we introduced last week, but might just have some follow-up conversation on, and then maybe a few other topics based on some of the news headlines that came out over the last 7 days. So I guess we'll just go ahead and start with that. One of the games that we talked about last week that Chow was basically spearheading the conversation on was the Steam release of this long in development indie game from a Japanese developer, Astalibra. So we had a decent discussion on that, but as a fallout from that conversation, it sounds like Josh in particular has put a lot of time into the game in the last week. So we figured we'd go ahead and start with that and give that kind of our headline spot for the moment. So, hey, Josh, we talked about Astalibra a little bit last week, talked about what Chow found interesting about it and some of the context behind the game. So now let's just kind of go into your time with it now that you've been able to put a few hours into it since that discussion from last podcast.
Yeah, about like 6.5 to 7 hours into it. I finished up Star Ocean: The Divine Force earlier this week, and then we'll talk about that in a little bit. And so I was really curious because my other friend that's finished it, Astalibra, after like 67 hours, kept praising it, and like I let you guys know, and then Chow gave it a shot, and he seems to like what he's been playing, and I think it's a really, really interesting game. Just we kind of went over the general gameplay style of it last week. It was like it's side-scrolling action RPG. It feels very old school. It feels definitely very like Ys 3, I'd say. And I like that it encourages a lot of weapon and armor swapping, because as you use a certain weapon and armor and even shield, you'll passively gain experience with them as you have them equipped and using them. And every time you fully level them up, you'll like gain a skill that you can like assign these skill crystals into. So you can like freely allot these skill crystals into like things like do you want to see like how much damage are you doing to enemies? Do you want to see their break gauge? Do you want to double jump? And like for example, the double jump might cost 4 skill crystals, so you might have to like kind of give up some of your other skills to get a double jump. And yeah, but it's all freely allotted, and like it's all up to you and like how you want to like assign those skills at any given moment. So it's really has an interesting way of like diversifying like your offensive and defensive skills. And Chow talked a little about like how there's this karma system as well. Well, so I was talking to my friend about it because early on in the game, you gain these scales, these Libra scales, and you can pretty much like choose any item in the game to like place on these scales, and it will like balance out. Like it might go one way or the other way. And I was thinking like, how what's the purpose of this? Because how my initial understanding of these scales, for example, was like I had like a bat wing and like a cobweb, just like as weapon drops, and the bat wing was like, oh, it gives you like a good stat boost on like magic. It could be like like the description is literally like magic boost, like in parentheses good, and then like the cobweb might be like attack boost, like epic or something, and then and like like each of these have like weights on them, and like and the scales will turn one way or the other. And I thought like if one of the items, say like the Batwing, is like weighs less than the other one, I thought that you would get like a less like or either less magic boost or less like or like a decrease in magic because of that, because of the way scales are weighted. So I was talking to my friend about this who completed the game and like was way more about the systems than I do, obviously. And it's interesting because what you really want to do in these scales is you have to kind of balance it out, find like items that like weigh each other out and try to get to a perfect equilibrium as possible. And the closer you get to equilibrium on these scales, the more that both of those things that it's boosting are like further enhanced. So that's kind of there's like a weird kind of like a push and pull mechanic on these scales that you kind of have to keep in mind. Like once you set them and you find something that you like, you don't have to really worry about them again. But I was like trying to wrap my head around this system because like
so
these scales
like a UI element, or are they like items in
they're
your
they're
inventory?
they're a UI element. Like once you get them, like you'll have a separate like I think it's called Libra in like the start menu. And then when you access it, you can like place pretty much any item in the game on each side of the scale. And like these scales are also like very narrative relevant. For instance, like a very very early story thing, like one of the first like kind of arcs in the game is you're delivering supplies to this couple, and they have a dog as well that they named after their late grandson, because their late grandson like was killed years ago by a demon. Things that happened during this story arc, like because they live in the middle of kind of like they live in the middle of the swamp because the wife has an illness where she needs like these access to these herbs that are nearby, so she can't live too far away from them. So um and basically like after they get at some point they get kidnapped by orcs. You go to this orc cavern and like kill all the orcs and the orc king and so forth, and then you find out like a revelation about like the identity of the dog that they have. And as the dog is sadly, tragically passing away, the dog the true identity of this dog is basically like do me a solid and like kill my past self. So like they like the scales have the narrative function of traveling through time. So you basically kill like the past incarnation of like who this dog really is. And once you kill that past incarnation, history basically kind of quote unquote like alters itself. So because this dog's past incarnation never existed, this couple's grandson is still alive, and they're like kind of better off for it now. That's kind of like the in vague terms, kind of the conclusion of that arc. And because of that conclusion of that arc of you altering history, there are now other elements introduced in the story. Like one of like the narrative scenes like takes place in like the far far future. I think like 13 Sentinels almost, where it's like, oh, there's been like a fluctuation in like the historical, like like they sense that someone has been that has tampered with history. So obviously there's a bigger narrative story at play here, which is
So when I was watching either you or Chow play this over the last week, it looked like I understand kind of I've only played Ys 3 Oath and Felgana, so like not the like when Chow first introduced this game last week, he specifically meant the Wanderers from Ys, the original Ys 3. I forget which one the subtitle is. And when I was watching you or him play it. I forget which one it was specifically. I really kind of saw it as like kind of an old school action RPG. But the way you're describing it now, and some of the way that Chow described it last week, is that there is really quite a very strong and always also kind of like a quite an out there narrative element to this game. So like, how much of this game just maybe I don't know if expressing it as a percentage is too dry, but it seems like a significant chunk of this game is just exposition, narrative, dialogue, questing in that sense, and not quite so much action combat.
It's pretty like the action combat is pretty heavy, like in between these scenes. So, I mean, it's not very very exposition heavy. It's like it kind of gets the job done when it needs to in the story wise, but it's a very limited like production wise because of the limited like scope of the development team, which was largely one person working on it. So like you have like scenes like where characters interact and so forth, but they never like take center stage, that they detract from like the focus of the action combat. I think a really interesting, fun progression to the to like leveling up your character is every time like you beat up a monster, like they drop these colored crystals, like these colored minerals, and like there's like a whole like skill tree progression system, but it's designed like a dungeon crawler. So basically, you have like this skill tree map, and like you're getting these boosts, like boost to strength, boost to HP, boost to magic, boost to luck, and like you're using these different colored crystals to unlock these nodes. But along the way, when you're like traversing this skill tree, sometimes there'll be like a door that's locked. So you have to go find on the skill tree, like you have to go navigate your way to like a key, and then once you obtain that key, you can use that key to unlock that branch of the skill tree. So you open it up, and then there'll be like some good nodes behind that as well, which is like an additional like fun element to like not just like, hey, you leveled up, go allocate your like stat points. It's like this is like another aspect of that to further enhance and boost your character. So that's like like it's a fun way to like kind of continue progressing your character as like you're traversing through the game. It's also I think my one like complaint about the game is like the hit stun is like a bit too much, especially for big bosses. Um, for example, there in like the first like your main hub is like this town, and like this town has a coliseum, and then like you can go through these challenge stages to gain like good items, like or get a skill crystal from them. Um, and then there will be like some challenge stages where like go beat like two of like the big boss that you just fought. So one of the big bosses you fought was like this like big dragon. But like every time like you hit something, there's like a big like hit stop to it. So like when you multiply it by two, it your screen is like it's basically chugging for every time like you hit something. So because like every time like you hit like say both of these two dragons, it's like multiplying that hit stop by two. Which is like I get it, like you want to convey that like you hit something, but I think the effect is too severe on that. Either like it's not like a big like it doesn't bother me that much, but it's just like one of those things like okay, like they can tone this down a little bit. Um, but other than that, like I'm really enjoying my time with it. I think it's a really interesting like old school RPG. Like I don't think it's like it'll speak to everyone, but it's like for those that do, I think especially those that like enjoy that like old school progression and not like this game tells you very little on what it wants you to do in terms of like there are sometimes there's like items you need to use on certain things to for them to interact, but the game won't give you a prompt to like say press circle to interact with this object. Like it'll expect you to like go into your inventory, highlight over that item, and press use to use it on that thing. Like this, let's say this pedestal that is blocking your way, and like you take a skull from it, and it'll block like another passage of it. If I want to use that skull on like that pedestal, it doesn't like give you a button prompt to interact. You have to go into your menu, go to items, go to your inventory, highlight over to the skull, and then press use on that. So it's very old school in that way, where it's like it takes a lot of like the quality of life enhancements that like modern game design has like got. It's like and it doesn't do that.
Does it indicate at all that this pedestal that you mentioned is interactable, or is it just kind of like you have to have some intuition and just try things?
It will like it'll give you like an indication that it's interactable by like say like this in this ore cavern there are two pedestals. One that has a wood one that has a wood skull, and then there's like a vacant gold one. So what you basically have to do is you take this wood skull from the pedestal, it actually give you the button prompt to say you can take this wood skull. So now you know that now you know that this pedestal is something that you interact with, but you have to find a way to get like a wood skull on this pedestal that unveil it opens up the path, and also get like a gold skull on that gold pedestal to open up the other path. So, for example, for this wood skull, you would have to take it back to like a lake that you encountered early on, and you know that like you're given the info that like this lake can give you a gold version of something as long as you answer truthfully to the spirit of the lake. So you have to remember that from a past story event, which is like maybe 15 to 20 minutes back. And then that's how you gain like the items that you would need to proceed on forward. So it's basically like basic puzzle design, but it's like it's incorporating like past narrative events to clue you in on like something that's like you don't know what at first when you go to that narrative scene, you don't know why it's showing you that until like you get to that part. Then the game expects you to remember, like, hey, remember that part back then. It won't tell you right away.
That makes it really sound like an adventure game almost, which I'm actually like really, it's really this last part that you've been discussing here. Like the narrative sounds kind of like, I don't know, time travel doesn't interest me inherently anymore. The combat I thought looked really good. And just from what I watched you and Chow play, I remember I was watching I think it was an IGN trailer, and someone's like, this looks really antiquated, but I think it looks really charming. Maybe that's just my age. Showing there, but the way you're describing these almost adventure game aspects where you have to remember the nuggets of information that you've obtained, even if it's only like over the course of events that are within 20 or 30 minutes apart, just kind of identifying that you have these items in your inventory and the way that they interact with the environment or the locations in the world. I don't know, like this last section of your discussion here is what's gotten me the most interested in this game compared across both podcasts.
For sure, and like it's like it's one of those things like it kind of expects you to remember the lessons that you learned from it. Like for example, I was trying to remember like how do I turn like copper ore into a copper ingot, and I was like, what do you do that again? And then like it's something because I forgot about the synthesis book that you have at the beginning of the game. It's like my friend's like, just go to the synthesis book. Like, oh yeah, I forgot it has synthesis book, and then you open up the synthesis book and it's very intuitive, like right away, like this, like, you know, these two, like it'll show you like, hey, you can make something for these two items. And once you make like the first time that item, it'll always like note it down saying like, you know, copper ore plus this like newt, you know, will make a copper ingot. And that's like always something that like you'll remember once you make it like the first time, you know. So it's just one of those like games that like you just have to remember like what systems you have you can engage with.
No, I think it really does sound. This like synthesis book, does it remember like recipes that you've done? Sorry, let me rephrase it. Like, does it start out blank and then it just logs things that you learn as you either make them yourselves or learn about them throughout, you know, your interactions with the other characters?
It'll log basically if you have the recipes of an item, it won't show you the end result unless you make it the first time, but it'll always show you like the two components that can always be fused. So like say, so like the copper ore and the newt, like if I never fused a copper ingot before, it'll show me that the copper ore and the newt can be fused together, but it won't show you the end result until like you fuse it for the first time. So like it's, and I know there's not like a lot of like guesswork, you know, because the synthesis book will show you that.
And I know you said that you're like 6 or 7 hours in, but I remember last week we saw this, and as you've been talking, I've been looking at some of the Steam reviews, and people are saying that this one guy says took him 70 hours to 100% this, which is very un-East-like. Well, I guess recent East games might get that long, but I guess like, can you tell from your 7 hours in that you're that this game is, I guess, quite a significant length, and you're only scratching the surface. Does it kind of indicate that it's?
I don't know exactly like what the scope of the game is like. Still still feels very early, even though it's like 6.5 to 7 hours in, and and to be fair, like a good chunk of like maybe an hour and a half of that playtime has been getting to the Coliseum challenges, because some of the challenge stages like they're doable, but like it's definitely something that like you kind of have to retry it several times to kind of get the flow of it, because some of these will be like beat these enemies like within the time limit. Some of these might maybe like they're pretty varied. So some of these may have you like traverse underwater through it, and then the underwater element of this game can be pretty challenging, because there's a whole stat called adaptability that will once you enhance it, you can like operate more like freely in underwater environments, whether it's like having a little bit more of the breath gauge or being slowed down a little bit less by underwater. So if you're pretty low on that, which I'm pretty low on adaptability, I'd have to kind of like find ways to like beat those challenge stages that are underwater focused. Like that's like they're pretty tough, and like I don't have the points in that. There might be other ones where like you have to like aim your crossbow carefully. There'll be like enemies at the very top of the screen, the where you have to like aim your crossbow at them, and you only have like a limited number of bolts on you to take them out. So like it's not saying that like the Coliseum challenges like significantly pad out my time, but like there are definitely like um stages in it where I'm like, okay, I'm scratching my head on like how to beat this, and then I have to like kind of take the time to like figure them out bit by bit, because there'll be like other challenge stages where like they're like traverse these platforms, thin platforms, and then you have to beat all these enemies in the time limit. So not only do you have to like worry about like a time limit, but you have to worry about not getting knocked off, because if you get knocked off, then it's like Castlevania where like it's like an instant fail if you get knocked off. And like it's fun because it's varied and like really test your skills on it. Like it feels pretty gratifying too.
So it sounds like when people say this has a 67-hour runtime, there's a lot of secondary objectives or ways that you can get off the beaten path, or spend like you said, an hour and a half doing extra stuff in the Coliseum because you feel like that'll help progress your character. So I don't know. It seems like there's just a lot of different gameplay options and just a lot to dig into here. Just like a really, really meaty game.
Yeah, because you'll be constantly like wanting to like switch up like your gear and like how you play at the start of the game I was like mainly focusing on like my dagger because it builds up the magic gauge while doing good damage, but now I've switched over to like a magical staff that I unlocked through the skill like the dungeon skill tree. Like it granted me that because I found treasure and it had that. So now like this staff is like awesome because like while it doesn't do a lot of physical damage, it charges up like the magic gauge super fast while spitting out like these fireballs. So it's taking like my magic stat into account for damage on that, and then at the same time I can also fire off magical spells pretty often, and those are pretty powerful as well. And then like for like some fights I might go back to like other gear to like make them a little bit easier depending on like the sort of fight that I'm interacting with.
I'm looking at the page on Steam right now. I'm like, do I have time? Because obviously within a month we're gonna be talking about games of the year, and I'm just like,
Yeah,
well,
I really
both
Pokemon's
you and
coming out, and
yeah. Well, luckily both you and Chow have been able to dig some time into it. I don't know how it'll be interesting once we can catch up with Chow to see how far he's gotten, because I think he might be a little bit farther than you, but I don't know how much progression he's made in the last week. But this is definitely like out of all the games that we try to find like these under the radar diamonds in the rough, this might be the one for this year.
Maybe,
Based on all the discussion about it.
I definitely if I feel very strongly for it, like as I play more and more into it, I might just champion it in the end of the year discussions. Like it's one of those games that like it's I was talking about this on Discord with one of our community members, like a few hours ago, because like there's just been like this prevailing like narrative, like not even just like on like communities, but it could be on social media as well. Of like these games didn't do well because it quote unquote it had no marketing at all, and I'm just like, dude, I'm playing a game that like got zero marketing mainstream whatsoever. You didn't hear about this game until I said something about it, pretty much. And I really didn't hear about it until I think my first exposure to it was like a Steam Next Fest demo. And like it was like a bad first showing because like when you're getting through Next Fest demos, you want the demos to be pretty brief and to the point because it's only such a limited time frame. So my first impression of Astalibra from the Next Fest demo wasn't positive because like I was under that mindset, like I just want to try out as many games as I can. But now that I've had like the time to like actually sit down per my friend's recommendation, like I'm just like really, really digging it. And when I look at like the obviously Steam DB and Steam charts are like the be all end all for these things, but this game
Seems
has
to be
had
doing well.
yeah, this game has had a pretty healthy like population, like more than like Neo The World Ends With You, more than like Relayer Advance, I think even more than Star Ocean The Divine Force.
Star
And
Ocean is like over 4,000
Okay.
peak, so I don't think quite as much as that.
But it's like,
But,
but that's definitely bigger than like other more well known like RPGs
Yeah.
to a certain extent. And this game had zero marketing because it's literally living off of like word of mouth. Not a lot of like other outlets like really mention this game at all.
Yeah.
Well, it's got
I-
an overwhelmingly positive rating on Steam with over 1,000 reviews. So like
Overwhelmingly
seems like the-
positive with that many reviews is really hard to get. So that says something.
it definitely seems like word of mouth is carrying this game to pretty high places. It seems like it got it on our podcast. It seems like a lot of the reviews are people are really espousing kind of the sort of same thing as what Josh said, is that they first saw this game on the Next Fest and they took them 5 hours to play through the demo, and then now they've gone to the full release, which was I think early October, and now they've 70 hours later and they've really enjoyed it and left a positive review. So definitely seems like a game that has had a good first impression and has held on to that first impression and been shared through positive word of mouth. And it seems like we're kind of both Josh and Chow have kind of contributed to that as well on this podcast. So the next time we talk about Astalibra will likely be in the context of a Game of the Year discussion in terms of where does this game rank amongst all the others that we've played this year. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how well it measures up, whether Chow, Josh, or others get more time to spend with it or not, just to see exactly where this, how far the good impressions from this game end up carrying it amongst some of the ones that we've expected to be talking about at the end of the year. The second game that we have on our docket is a game that we haven't talked about recently, but has a release date just in the next couple days within the month of November. And that is Monochrome Mobius Rights and Wrongs Forgotten. And if you don't remember what this game was when we talked about it earlier in the year, this is a game in the Utawaremono mythos universe. It's an action. Yeah, it's an action RPG spin-off. Is it a spin-off?
I believe so.
I don't know if it's a spin-off or just more of a... Okay. Yeah, so I don't know exactly what makes it distinct from a standard Utawaremono game, but on November, was it the 2nd? Early in the month, just a couple days ago, it got a demo on the PlayStation Store in Japan, and that has made the rounds a little bit in terms of what people's first impressions of the demo are. We have on-hands impressions of the demo because Josh decided to take a look at it and had a little bit of a fun time with it. So I'll just go ahead and hand it right back off over to Josh to talk about his times with the Monochrome Mobius demo on the PlayStation Store.
Right. Yeah. I by chance I just remember, I was like, oh yeah, they're releasing a demo for this. It was like on like November 2nd, so it was just a few days ago. So I wanted to check it out. Because I played a little bit of Utawaremono on my Steam Deck. I want to get back to it, but like I just haven't had time with other games. Yeah. But what Brian said is like what makes this distinct. Usually Utawaremono games are very visual novel heavy with some intersperse of like strategy RPG battles in betweens, but it's mainly like visual novel. This one is a little bit more gameplay focused, where there are still like obviously it's narrative driven, story driven. There are story cutscenes and so forth, but they made like a genre switch to like make it more gameplay focused and have turn based battles instead of the strategy RPG like kind of grid perspective. So I was like, okay, I'm curious to see like how this plays, how this looks, what does it feel like when when you're getting to it. So after you get the introductory cutscene. of the game and like the opening movie, you're introduced to like the main character Oshtor, and you get into like the tutorial battle, and uh, and then like you have to go back to town after that tutorial battle. And the first thing I was very surprised. The first thing I noticed when like I started moving around this character and like navigating like, the camera and so far, I was like, holy shit, they put way too much motion blur in this game. It reminded me of Final Fantasy Type Zero HD. It's not to that extent, but it's pretty damn close to it. I put like a little like demonstration on Twitter on like what it looks like and in motion. It's really rough right now on console, and this is definitely not going to get fixed on the console version. It's way too close to release. And there's no setting in the options menu for like to turn the motion blur off or anything. It's rough, man. Just simply like moving around in that game. Like the camera is already a little bit floaty and like maybe a little bit fisheye lensy, as you mentioned the other day, Brian. So it does have like an aspect of that, but just like even just like moving around, like if you want to like go around, like see around the corner as like you're navigating about, like the whole screen just turns into a blur.
Yeah.
Just
So
as
motion.
you're
Some people
go
feel
for it.
really, really passionately about motion blur and depth of field. It's one of the things where there are like two camps of people in my perception. People either immediately go to turn motion blur and depth of field off,
That's
just
me.
because it's out of principle. But also, I do think motion blur can look good, but it's one of those things where it's like if it's implemented well, you don't notice it because it feels natural. So
Yeah,
unless
if
there's a
it's like
toggle
per
that clearly
object motion blur, then like that's totally fine. Like say if you want to like only have like motion blur like a sword swing, for example, while keeping like the rest
yeah.
of the image
Like in
crisp.
Dark Souls, where they do that like kind of overpowered motion blur on the sword swings to make them seem like more heavy and like more impactful.
Yeah, and this one, like even just like the brief like footage that I sent to like friends and like showing them, it's like, yeah, this is already making me sick because like definitely for some people they'll be fine and they won't be affected. Like I don't see I don't see the problem, but there are definitely people like me, for example, were like over half an hour in, I already started feeling ill like playing this game because like I just couldn't stand like the motion blur. It was like making me feel dizzy. And that's how I felt about Type Zero HD as well. So there'll definitely be people who like if they like on the overseas release for this game, the English release, it'll only be available on PC, and we have yet to see what the PC port of this game looks like.
If
People
it's
are
anything
Oh,
like
I
the
had
previous
forgotten about
Utsuwaru
that.
Mono games, yeah, I did a whole feature about that because it's like I understand why, but it's like there's a portion of this series fan base in the West that played it on PlayStation because that's where it
yeah,
came out first, and they won't be able to play
It's all
it.
ringing a bell now. I remember this now. It
yeah,
just had been long enough.
I
right,
hope
yeah,
the PC port is better than the trilogy because one thing I said is that it's 720p 30 locked for the original trilogy, which if you're playing on Steam Deck, it works out fine because you're not going to want it over 30 FPS anyway. You're not going to have it over 720p. But for a game like this, where, well, at least on first sniff, it's more like graphically intensive. It's supposed to have a bit more of a presentation. Hopefully, there's more options. But I'm looking at some of Josh's tweets. I'm not so sure about that anymore.
yeah. And like there's 30 FPS capped on consoles as well as playing on PS5, and that's that's fine. Whatever. The motion blur is more of the deal breaker here, especially for a lot of people who are sensitive to that stuff, and that's
Wait, it's
absolutely
30
understandable.
FPS capped on PS5 as well?
Yes.
What about the resolution? Is it at least like a decently high resolution?
I mean, the resolution seems fine. I didn't see like anything. I mean, I like on my game capture, I can only go up to 1080, so
Mm.
it seems fine. I didn't play it on 4K or whatever. But it seemed okay. It's just the motion blurs a lot. The battle system is it's still very very early game type stuff. So you only had like a standard attack and like a skill that takes up MP. So I mean, there's no big surprises there. I do like that the attack animations are very very fast in the game just by default. Um, so I was like, okay, let me go try to proceed a little bit further in the demo and see what else this game has to offer. I I guess I didn't watch much gameplay footage of this game because I don't know if this was known, but I went into um the town, like the first village in the game, and I was not expecting the NPC models to. I shit you not. They look like PS1 era 3D models. I it looks like something's wrong with them. To be honest, I'm like, is there like a lighting bug or something? Um, like
Yeah,
I put some pictures on my Twitter, and like I was just going around town, and like these character models are just like very like they don't have like they're not textured. They're just kind of like they were like put into like a 3D model program, and then they're like, okay, we're done. That's that.
it's one
They're
of those
just like
things where
pictureless.
I could tell they were trying to maybe be like stylized, but it almost instead of looking like stylized low detail, they look unfinished low detail. That's maybe a fine line, but it almost doesn't look intentional, even if it probably is. But I can't even say that with certainty. Like, is this intentional? Because the result isn't good looking.
Like
So
like
I'm sure there's a way they could have
yeah.
made it where they said, okay, we don't have the resources for this. Let's just have all the NPC and background characters stylized in this manner, whether they're silhouettes or like a couple shades of color or whatever. But in this case, the result doesn't look good,
Yeah,
in my
like say
opinion.
for Persona 5, for example, like they have NPCs like in the train stations, they're like all faceless, but they're all very, very background characters that you
No,
can
that's
go
a good.
through,
Yeah, it's
very
a good
like
example. Yeah.
stylized, like
Mhm.
silhouetted type of like NPCs. So like they kind of blend into the background. You don't really know. It's like they're meant to just like represent like a bustling city, going there about their day to day, and like so it's something that you don't really notice. But in this game, they just look so out of place and unfinished, and I just don't understand it. Like I was like for a good like 5 to 7 minutes, I was just going around town taking pictures of these NPC models and be like, I'm losing it. This is insane. I don't know like who said this is okay. This is all right because they just look so unfinished. Like I don't get it. So like maybe we'll have like some of my images in like the a podcast post or whatever, like give people like a better idea of what they look like. But it's just
We can embed tweets in articles, can't we?
I think so.
We can either
Yeah,
do that.
yeah,
We can either
yeah,
do that or
yeah,
the images themselves on the post
yeah,
on the site.
yeah. So
Either way.
either way, people should like get a look at these at the podcast post if those are available.
Put it on the thumbnail for the podcast. Just an NPC model.
Yeah, I can send some through Discord, and then if you guys want to use that or not.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's just it. It's kind of I don't know how I kind of feel. I'm praying for the Utawade Rumono fan base on this one because a lot of them are like, the story's gonna pull through, the character's gonna pull through, and hopefully it is. Because right now, a lot of like the overall polish of the game feels like they should have like pushed this back and like done something about a lot of these elements, whether it's the motion blur or the character models. But other than that, like I didn't play much more outside of that. I saw like one more story event scene, and it does at the very least like when they introduce the other main character, it's like Oshtor and then the other Shunya. She's like the white haired girl with like a red and black dress. Like upon meeting her, like her introductory scene with Oshtor is like actually really adorable because like you see her like kind of like stealing food from like a field, and like once you notice her, she like kind of she runs away at like in a comical manner with like a comical sound effects. So like there is something like that fun spirit in the game, but it's just my first impression of the demo is like this is something this is a game I literally cannot play without feeling ill. So hopefully once again, hopefully the PC release has some sort of like way to turn off or lessen the motion blur, or people will just have to tweak the INI files and hopefully find a way to disable it or something.
I really hope that works out, but there still isn't any mods for the Utaru Mono trilogy to raise the resolution or raise the FPS cap because there's no like user accessible INI. So if this is on the same engine, that's probably going to be the same thing. So we gotta hope they get it right.
So, best of luck. This is coming out pretty soon, I think. I think it's like November 17th. So just right around the corner.
Yep.
But yeah, that's my initial impressions. You should go give it a shot, James, just like very briefly and see what you think about it.
Maybe I'll give it a shot after I'm done with the current game I'm playing.
Yeah. What is the current game that you're playing?
I'm sorry, Zach. I got Sonic Frontiers early from a sort of broke street date.
Yeah, I remember you talking about Zach Reese is an alumni of the site that went off to Sega PR. So, but James has been messing around with Sonic Frontiers before Street Date because he got it from a local joint here that gets these games in early. But I don't know if you want to talk about that briefly.
Yeah, but from an outsider's perspective, I've seen a little bit of chatter just on Twitter and Discord channels about Sonic Frontiers. As someone who isn't like in that sphere, it seems fun because it seems like equally earnest excitement for the game, but also people that are just like taking the piss on it because it had a kind of a poor like game. Remember when IGN had all those like exclusive gameplay videos and they didn't showcase the game very well? It just seems like there's an interesting mix of earnest and both like impressions for like the game and expectations for it, that some people are genuinely excited and some people are just like here for the chaos or here for the ride. So it'll be interesting to see where it ends up landing.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about it too much because again, it's not out yet, and like even if it doesn't perfectly again, I bought my copy, so I'm not beholden to any sort of embargo, but the review embargo does lift on Monday. It would feel kind of shitty to folks that.
That's true.
So all I'll say is I'm enjoying it. That's it.
Okay. All right. So as Josh talked about, we kind of made it our headline of our last week's podcast, the release of Star Ocean: The Divine Force. Since then, I have made a little bit more time into it. I think Josh has basically clocked it, has finished it. There's been some impressions out of both the West and of Japan for what people are feeling about the game, how the game has potentially sold, even though we don't have any concrete information on that yet, other than I guess it underperformed at physical sales in Japan, though we don't have the whole picture, so I don't want to extrapolate too much. But so I put a few hours into this game since Josh talked about last week on the podcast. I did play Star Oceans 1 through 4. I did skip 5, so I don't have quite the I don't have that most recent experience, but I will put it this way: even though it's a low bar, I am enjoying this game way more than Star Ocean 4. Star Ocean 4 has been, for the last decade or so, maybe not decade, when did it come out? A long time ago. Kind of shat on in a lot of different respects. Really? Okay, well, now I must come up with a...
That was really? On the PS2, wasn't it?
No, not
Star Ocean 4.
2009 or 2008, so yeah, still more than a decade.
Yeah.
Damn it! Where's time? Where is time going?
Yeah, Star Ocean 4 is a 360 release. It initially released at the 360, and then later on PS3,
and then eventually came out, on PS, and then had the remaster and all that. But anyways, so Star Oceans 1 through 3 were good, not great games. I think Star Ocean 2. This isn't an uncommon opinion, so I'm not going out on a limb here. But Star Ocean 2 was the one game in the series that I felt broached into that like actually a really good classic game that I wish they continued with their remasters on, like they did with the Star Ocean
in Japan.
Oh yeah, but I am enjoying. I am not finished with Star Ocean: The Divine Force, and I think I'm still in the first half of the game. But I've gotten like the 6 party members. I'm onto like the second continent or whatever. I played a lot of the mini games. I've encountered a lot of the private events, but then I got pulled away with another assignment for the site. But I'm like really eager to go back to the Divine Force. I'm actually like, it's one of the games where I've been trying to play it on Steam Deck just because I want to have access to it. And it runs okay on Steam Deck. I don't quite know all the tweaks to get it to behave the best on there.
What people recommend is if you're fine with dealing with the shader compilation, it's whatever. Eventually the shader, the pre-compiled shaders will be uploaded and whatnot. If you want to avoid as much as stutters as possible right now, you can install Proton G, and then there's like a launch command to have it use DXVK async, which means that it will, instead of it stuttering, stuff will just pop in the first time that shader is compiled. So it's probably a little bit better. It's a trade-off, but most people seem to prefer that to the stutters.
So I've installed Proton GE, but I guess I'm not well versed enough to figure out like the launch commands or figuring out how to make it operate differently. So maybe I'll follow up with you specifically on that after this.
Yeah.
But this game is like, I kind of want to avoid this phrasing, but it's something that I can't think of another way to put it. It's like comfort food. It feels like an RPG from the PS2 era. It feels like an RPG from the PS2 era, and I'm totally here for it. It's not doing anything that we haven't seen before. It's not doing anything that is novel or new. But I'm enjoying the cast. I'm enjoying the combat. I love just kind of like going off the beaten path or going back to old areas and seeing if I can find old secrets or old chests.
Your sentiment is common. I've heard it a lot, and I think it's one of those things that like it feels like a game from a bygone era, but it's a game that you remember. Like if you were like 10 to 15 years younger, you see yourself playing this game and having a ton of fun with it. It's like a game that like it's a type of game that like you enjoyed at a much younger age, and now that like you're older, you're like, yeah, sure it has problems, but I'm still having as much fun as I did when I was like playing this type of game when I was younger,
Yeah,
So
it feels like if this was a sort of game that came out like on the early PS3 or late PS2, and I'm like scale the production values accordingly, I think it would have been like maybe not a mega hit, but a hit, at least a cult classic in the sense that so many other JRPGs of the era were, that Star Ocean 3 maybe wasn't. But there's a lot of things in this game have just really surprised me. So we kind of, even when the game was first shown off, we said it doesn't have the highest production values. The mocap is not great. The animation and there's the model quality themselves is not good. The English lip sync is off. It doesn't really have much of any lip sync at all. But surprisingly, I actually think the English voice acting is quite good, like genuinely. And I don't know if maybe I'm easy to please. I play most games in English, so maybe my impressions aren't that valuable, but I've played a lot of games with bad English voice acting, and I don't think it's one of them. I'm enjoying the cast. I think that Raymond and Leticia are both really well acted. I don't even know the names of their actors, but just I have no issues listening to the English voice acting in this game. The animation work is a little bit of an acquired taste, but it's kind of one of those things where I can kind of calibrate my mindset to say like, okay, this game was made, on a budget of some sort. So I understand that there's trade-offs there.
To me, like the repeated cat animations is sort of endearing to me. Like especially like you'll remember it like the when they're, let's say Midas is saying no, so he'll shake his head and then like cross his arms as like shaking his head. But then they're like other times like other characters do it, so it's definitely like something that's common. But sometimes they're like used in such like great comedic effect. Like I won't spoil like in a coffee scene, but like there's a character that you meet in the back half of the game, and this character like when you first meet them, they'll do like the Raymond like thumbs up, and then his arms like slowly going down as he's like, giving the thumbs up, and like I just like freaking lost it because it is so funny, like just seeing that animation in the context of that scene, and it's like like I get it, but at the same time like it's funny to me.
Yeah, I love like we've talked about how like the voice actors for the main cast are good, and I agree with that. I think the dub is genuinely really good, even if it's not like amazing. It fits the characters, but I think that the main thing that has stood out with me is I really like the party dynamic. Like it's really good, especially when you get Midas in the party. He's just like an old grump, but it's like it's an interesting stereotype because he's the old wizard, but it's not like he's frail or anything. It's like got like a like steampunk pimp setup or something. It's weird, but it's also really funny.
It's funny because like they classify they say he's 37 years old. I'm like, this is what Japanese developers think is 37 years old in JRPG. He's just like full on white hair. He looks like he's like in his mid 40s, and it's like, yeah,
it's another one of those nostalgic.
And he has really funny skills. He has a really funny skills.
Yeah.
And this is not really a major thing in the grand scheme of things, and then I'll hand it off to James. There's an early game quest where you have to fight a bunch of worms, and I don't know if I was just not paying attention or if I just wasn't awake, but I couldn't figure out how to get to spawn them. So I go to Google and I search, and it's like you had to buy a certain food at the inn because that's what the quest giver said that he did before he encountered these worms, and it was just clever enough to be like, oh, that makes, they're doing some interesting things here where they don't explicitly, it's not drawn out for you and just like a waypoint, go here, do the thing. And the game does have still plenty of that. It like the main path is still pretty easily like signposted and breadcrumbed, where it's not an open world thing where they keep you guessing and you just kind of do what you want. But in the terms of some of the side quests, a lot of them are just kind of like pretty mundane, where you get a certain number of item, then bring to a person, but it does a few interesting things, and I'm enjoying just accomplishing those. Like I'm feeling motivated to talk to everyone in town and play all the mini games of the Estoa or whatever it's called. And
I do like the function that they have where, like, say you have to like get a fetch quest for something, and you might have like one of those in your inventory, but like, I don't know where this drops, so you can actually like hover over that item in your inventory and like press a button and say, do you want to like go into your bestiary and like search for the monster that like dropped it.
You can do that?
Yes. Yes. It'll give you a prompt. The button prompt would say like search or item or something, but there's a button prompt that allows you to do that from the main menu, from the item inventory. So, yep.
I wasn't going to say it as openly as James, but I also was like, wait, you can do that?
Yep. So there's like these little things in the game that like it doesn't openly tell you, but it's there.
And what were you going to say, James, before I didn't mean to talk over you?
I forget now, to be honest.
You were just so stunned upon that revelation. Yeah,
it's one of those things. Go ahead.
I was going to talk about more about that.
It's just that I don't know if this game is this going to sound a little silly. I don't know if Star Ocean: The Divine Force is great or even good. No, I'll take that back. It is good. I'm enjoying it. Like it's trying to like organize your thoughts and be like, am I just enjoying this because I'm nostalgic for this sort of game and I'm just kind of indulging in something that is a little bit just average, but it is something that I have, these fond memories of playing earlier games in the series.
I think it's totally fine for like to have like fond memories of a game that like that you're having fun with and calling it good. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with like, oh, like is this actually like qualitatively good, like on like a skill that I've like built up as I've like played, or like can I just say it's good because I'm having fun with it? And I think the latter every time. I'm not gonna. I unabashedly like really like this game. Like after I was done with it, I had a blast with it. Like my final playtime was like maybe like around 40 hours. And that like I did post game as well, and seeing like what post game is like, and this game has like even such like it's so like old school in the sense that like each of the Raymond and Laetitia route has like an exclusive optional party member that you get, and like to get this party member, like they like these quests appear at certain, like different points in the story depending on like how like plot relevancy, and like you have to like get like fetch quests for them, and like for Laetitia's route it's kind of like quote unquote free from like from my friends that like did that route. It's like, oh yeah, you get this party member like just doing like these easy fetch quests, like, but for me like going on the Raymond route, like getting like the character, like I had most of the things that I needed for their fetch quest, but there's like a certain step in that fetch quest where it's like at this point in the game it's difficult to get these items, so I had to like farm like a certain spot for like a good like 15 to 20 minutes to like get enough of this item to get them to join my party. And like and after you get that party member, they actually contribute to like the cutscenes that like happen in the story. They're like they don't fade away in the back like how that one party member in Yakuza 7 was, for example. Like they actually like contributed to the story in like story cutscenes. And
well,
like,
that's one thing that the early Star Ocean games were really good at, but that might have been an easier time because it was all text-based, and the difference between a private action and a story cutscene in those games is not quite as different when you've got voiced cutscenes. And then 4 got away from that. I forget if the last party member in 4 was technically optional or not, and then I don't know about 5. So it's kind of
I'm so surprised that like there's so much voice acting in this game. I think this game might be fully voiced. I can't think of like a single unvoiced line. Like even NPCs that you speak to, like they're fully voiced. Now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of voice acting, and surprisingly, even though other parts of the game don't have the high production values, voice acting is just just good. I don't know if it's going to win any awards, but I'm enjoying it. I'm listening to the cutscenes as they play. A part of that is because a lot of the cutscenes, they don't give you the option to like progress to the next. As far as I can tell, they don't give you the option to progress to the next line of dialogue. So it's either you gotta, you've either got to skip the whole scene or just let it play out. Which is one of those things where it's like, if it could let me skip the lines, I probably would be, just because I read fast. And I'm not saying that as a talent. Most people read faster than the actors deliver the lines, but because it's kind of forced me to enjoy it, then I'm enjoying it. So it's kind of like a little bit of a strange concession.
There's like a small portion of like the cutscenes where like you'll engage with like a conversation like with a character, like a side quest NPC, like just something that like you have this conversation with them, but it doesn't like go into a cutscene proper. Like those are like the types of quote unquote cutscenes, like in-game cutscenes that you can't skip the lines after you've read them. So like it depends, and it's kind of like weirdly Jake and old school in that way too. Where like sometimes it does lets you, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, I mean, I think there is like a shift in the way the game is presented and structured, like in the second half of the I'd say like the back third of the game, where I feel like there are definitely you can feel like the budget restraints of this game, more so than the early parts of the game in that back third of the game, where like it's kind of a bummer that it's presented like this, because it's a lot of like story cutscenes all at you at once, and then like you engage with gameplay through like narrative corridors, and then after you're done like with that, it's a lot more story cutscenes. So it's like the first like 2/3 of the game are like very like open zone exploration, going to the next town, and then like the back there is like very more streamlined in that sense. And I was like, it's still okay. I just kind of it just kind of falls apart a little bit, like structurally in that sense. But the overall narrative after everything is said and done is like, it's still solid. I still liked it, and I don't know. I just really enjoy it. I'm just glad that like this sort of game is like allowed to exist, and it definitely it made me have those fuzzy Star Ocean 3 feelings, and that's good.
And just like Astalibra, the next time we talk about Star Ocean: The Divine Force probably will be in the context of a Game of the Year discussion, and it sounds like it might be kind of a sympathetic entry. I'll put it that way. It seems like a lot of us are feeling pretty positive on it, so it'll be interesting to see where it ultimately ends up.
I mean, I wouldn't call it sympathetic. I'd be like, I'm ready to like. I don't know if it's going to be in the top 10, but I definitely want it to be in the top 10 somewhere. Personally.
Yeah, it's hard to know for sure until you get the whole list, collated, and kind of go back to all those early games in the year that might have been fading from my memory, and kind of recontextualize it feels like go ahead, James.
A quick reminder that this year Endwalker will be up for the list.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wasn't going to call it Endwalker specifically, but just like, you got to pull our minds to early in the year stuff like Elden Ring, for instance. It feels like a lifetime ago, but we're going to revisit our experience with that game, and how does it stack up to some of the more recent releases from later in the year and things like that. And the last game that we have on our section here to talk about, that I have earmarked, and I just kind of put it here because I don't know if we're going to get another chance to talk about it in the rest of the year, is that I did finish Cold Steel 4, which is good that I did, now that we have a release window for both a release date for Azure and a release window for Trails into Reverie. And obviously Cold Steel 4 is a game that has been discussed in a few different contexts, both in this site and just in the larger gaming sphere, in terms of people's impressions on it and the closeout of that saga. I guess this is probably a very lukewarm and safe way to state it, is that I didn't hate the game. I wasn't angry at it, but I just kind of thought that it felt almost like a chore, that I felt obligated to play it because I'm more interested in what follows after it than I am in it. But I felt like it was something that I had to do in order to get there. I think the main thing is that after playing Cold Steel 4, and I'm trying to keep this high level so I don't go into like immediate spoiler territory, is that I don't like any of the antagonists. I don't find them compelling. And to even call out people and identify them as antagonists in Cold Steel in general, especially 4, is difficult. And that's one thing that I think a lot of JRPGs struggle with, is that I can't think of a game recently that's had a really strong, good antagonist that you just, a well-written character that you despise because you find yourself either sympathetic to them and you see where their failings are, or you find where they're standing in opposition to your protagonist or whatever. But Cold Steel 4 does this thing where everyone that you're pitted against either is someone who is just testing you because it's the right thing to do, or you feel like the opposition with them is somewhat contrived in the first place. Like, why are we even on different sides? And the game kind of admits that, where it does this thing with the rivalries, where it pits major characters against each other out of almost obligation, like literally in the story where they have to be in conflict, therefore they are. And I just didn't find that really compelling. In terms of the game's progression, in terms of the combat, in terms of the scope, in terms of just the gameplay itself, I thought it was good and I enjoyed it a lot. And it was like comfort food in that sense as well. But I just didn't really have any of those moments where I was in a final encounter with a boss fight or with a story arc that I really felt motivated to keep pushing in that sense. I know this is really high level, but I'm just trying to keep it from diving deep into specific examples that would go into spoiler territory, things like that. But
you make a good point of like, I'm trying to think of like if there was like any RPG this year that actually had like a really compelling like antagonist. And like the only one that like springs to mind is like, depending on the route selection you did for triangle strategy, I guess that would be like the one that comes to mind.
Okay, I will give some specific examples just so I'm not so mealy-mouthed about it. But like, you go into some of the shrines and you fight like Vita or you fight Le Guin, but they're never really opposed to you. They only fight you because it's like, oh, here's our obligated boss fight against these characters, but they're not really standing against you. They're just testing you. And then you're at one of the fortresses, and it's the 4th Armored Division, where you fight Elliot's dad and the other, I don't remember their names, I'm sorry. But again, they're just testing you. Like, they're not really opposed to you. You're just fighting them out of obligation because they're like, I want to make sure that your conviction is strong enough or whatever. The only 2 characters in Cold Steel 4 that really feel like they had like a beef against you and were really opposed to you was Rufus Alberea and then the Chancellor. And even then, the game kind of wiggles out of it a little bit at the end, where Reen's like, oh, he kind of has this final moment with the Chancellor that is a little bit more sympathetic. So even in that case, they kind of weasel out of it at the end. And then the game's ultimate boss fight is kind of very nebulous, involving like the curse of the country, which I don't think is a good antagonist. It's something that is explicitly evil and need to be dealt with, but it wasn't something that I thought was really that compelling. So that, I think, is the main weakness of Cold Steel 4, if I had to dilute it down, is that I wasn't compelled to feel like that I was really overcoming something that was really an obstacle in my way, other than like this curse aspect, or there's something, this fixated apparition of the country of Arabonia that kind of genesis out of nowhere and had always been there. I really kind of like conflicts that are more personally, or at least slightly smaller scale, where a character or a group of characters really is opposed to the progression of the player or the protagonist and has to be dealt with in a way. Where here it kind of puts all that stuff with the society and Ouroboros kind of on the back burner until the very, very end. So that's kind of why I felt like it kind of feels like a chore. It kind of feels like, well, we're obligated to do this. We're most of the way there. Let's get this wrapped up so we can move on to the thing that actually matters. That's kind of how I felt like playing through Cold Steel 4. So I didn't hate it. I just felt like it was. What was what?
What's your hour count in that game?
Hard to say, because I have a bad habit of letting it idle at the main screen. I don't feel like it was as long as 3. I felt like it was a bit shorter. I think it was like 60, 70 hours.
Okay.
And I was pretty comprehensive. Shout out to Chow, who has written several guides on the series, and pretty thorough ones. And as always, I think I followed his guide on 3 as well. And even though I followed his guide, I still didn't get all the treasure chests. I'm like, damn it. Like, I must just get sloppy and skip one. But the Trails gameplay loop, I actually quite enjoy. I don't know. I like the just the way that it I think the pacing here, if I want to say some good things about Cold Steel 4, I think the pacing is pretty decent. I think the going from not knowing where Reen is to progressing through reintroducing the characters that, based on the events of the third game and things like that, and then escalating the conflict to the final chapter of the game. The pacing from the start to finish is decent. It's just that where it ends up, I thought was kind of bland. So I know I'm kind of like speaking out of both sides of my mouth here. So it does some things well, but I think at that point I was just kind of I had my fill of these characters. I've had my fill of this location and this environment. I kind of want to move on to the next thing. And I know I'm speaking from a place where I kind of have glimpses of what's in Hajimari or Kuro, so I kind of know what's coming up. So like, I'm playing this game as it was brand new, where you didn't know what was next. Maybe I would have felt a little bit differently. But obviously, we're not in that place, so I can't put myself in that place. And I can't really talk about whether it was worth playing until I play Hajimari and or Reverie and see like how that, if there's any payoff from that. But I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I found time to do it. It's still my least favorite of the Cold Steel arc, but it still has a lot of the same strengths as the series has always had. Just it has a lot of weaknesses as well. And I know that's very equivocating, but that's kind of how I feel about the game. So I think it's an earnest. That's just me being as honest as I can. All right. And with that, I think we've covered all of the games that we had on our docket for this week. So nothing explicitly new, but as we go into the subsequent podcast of November, it sounds like that will be changing very quickly. We've had Harvestella released really recently, but I don't think anyone here on the cast has had a chance to quite get to that just yet. We've got obviously Pokemon, Tactics Ogre, so many other things that we'll be looking into over the next couple of weeks as people get a time to cover those. As we go into the news section of this podcast, I do have a few article shout outs that I want to make sure we give, that we highlight here at least. And I believe James is the byline for all three of these. So I'm just going to go ahead and go in order. The first one is something that James talked about on the podcast, I believe 2 weeks ago, but has written up in a formal feature on the site. And this is specifically talking about Final Fantasy XIV's variant dungeons. Correct me if I'm wrong, James, but this came out in patch 6.25. Yes. It was the first time they introduced the variant dungeon, and you talked about how it behaves a little bit differently from the normal experiences in 14. I think Chow ended up linking a community-made flowchart for how the dungeons worked. You can go ahead and either listen to our podcast from 2 weeks ago where we talked about the variant dungeons, or we can point you to this new feature up on the site about why the variant dungeons are the best new content in Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker expansion. James, I know you've had a chance to talk about these on the podcast before, but I don't know if writing this up in a formal manner like this, if you've got any specific thing that you want to call out here.
Not really. I mean, I've already talked about it on the podcast before, and like anything I'd want to talk about is in the article itself.
Okay. But yeah, if you haven't been up to date on what a variant dungeon is or what was added to Endwalker in 6.25, go ahead and give that a read. It's up on the site. Again, it is listed as Final Fantasy XIV's new variant dungeons are the best new content Endwalker has added yet. The second feature that we have is, again, something we've also kind of talked about on the podcast. You can kind of tell that that's something that we that's kind of a cadence that we follow pretty regularly, where we'll kind of give our more immediate reactions here in this format, and then once we get the time to kind of solidify our thoughts and get them written up, we'll put them on the site. And this next one is for The Legend of Nayuta Boundless Trails, which is another game from Falcom that is getting its official English release next year in 2023. And James, again, had the chance to talk about that on the podcast a few weeks ago, actually ever since it was really announced. But put up a new feature on the site stating that The Legend of Nayuta Boundless Trails is the 2023 JRPG that should be on everyone's radar. And we kind of have talked about exactly what this game is and why people are interested in it. And I know Adam is just kind of interested in it, knowing some things about how it is kind of a standalone entry, but plays more into some of Falcom's other properties where people have compared it to Tokyo Xanadu or even Ys. But obviously in that Legend of Heroes or Kiseki kind of framework in a way. So again, I just want to make sure I give James a chance to speak to the article that he put up on this site if he wants to.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically just a not really a full like review, because I didn't put too much of a focus on too in depth. It's just like I played through it. I talked about it on the podcast. I thought it was really, really good. And I just wanted to kind of put a shout out and say, hey, if you're not paying attention to this, maybe give it a look.
No, but we're always trying to find like these games that we don't want to let go under the radar. So trying to do that preemptively for Legend of Nayuta for next year. So it's definitely something that's on my radar. And I know Adam has expressed interest in it as well. So go ahead and give that a read on the site. If that is something that you're not sure of or not quite sold on, or even if you are sold on it, but you just want to read it anyway, go ahead and give that a look. And the last thing that we've got is an interview feature for, we've been talking about it, Star Ocean: The Divine Force. We had the chance to send some questions over to Tri-Ace about the release of the first game in the series in several years. It's Tri-Ace's first major project in over 6 years. So we had the chance to kind of get in touch with them and get some questions answered. We have those interview answers up on the site. I'll just kind of be honest, a lot of this, with interviews, it's always kind of difficult, because a lot of these, to be honest, are explicitly kind of marketing. They're trying to sell the game to you. Of course they are. We do sometimes get some interesting nuggets, and this one, it does give a little bit of insight about the release of the game. We've had some interviews in the past where we get the answers back, but we just decide not to publish because it is just purely marketing. This one's kind of on the fringe, but we do have the questions answered up on the site if you're interested in reading into some of the insights behind the development and the release of Star Ocean: The Divine Force. One of the more specific call-outs here that I know that we asked, and I believe James was the one that posited this question, was specifically about the font size, how it is really small on both console and especially on Steam Deck. But really, no, we had the question asked, but we didn't really get any good feedback of it. It doesn't seem like it's something that is explicitly going to be looked at. Right now, it's kind of and is what it is. We've expressed our concern, I don't know if that's overstating it, about the fact that there are no options for it, but they kind of equivocated on the question, and that's where it stands. But we did also get some questions answered about the Duma system, about the fact that they're revisiting a series that hasn't seen an entry in a while, and the state of the studio and things like that. So we do have these interview questions answered up on the site as well. And with that, we'll go into the news for the week, which similarly is a little bit light, because I think we're kind of in a staging ground where a lot of games are releasing, and announcements, since we've already kind of packed the Q1 of 2023 so full, announcements are kind of slowing down, but we still have a few new release dates to go into the Q1 of 2023 as we go into these news headlines. The first major one here is about the upcoming Octopath Traveler 2, which, if you don't remember, is releasing in February of next year on the 24th. We had a month or so ago our first look at some of the characters, Hikari and Agnia. And here we got a character trailer for two new characters, Partitio and Osvald. And the trailer that accompanied these characters actually just showcases, obviously it's focused on specifically these two characters, but it also just showcases just a lot of gameplay, a lot of arts, and a lot of environment just in general. So if you want to just get a further look on Octopath Traveler 2, like this Osvald and Partitio, I assume that's how it's pronounced, character trailer just contains just a lot of footage that is, if we were inclined to, we could probably dig and really extract a lot out of it. My main takeaway from these trailers is that I just love Partitio's English voice actor. He's the merchant class character, and he speaks in like a southern drawl and wears like a trench coat and a cowboy hat.
Yeah, they mentioned that the English voice is Jas Patrick for Partitio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's very animated. Based on the art and the gameplay that we see, it fits the character well. It's almost over the top, but in a way I don't mind it. So I don't know, it's kind of fun. And then Osvald is a character who is a convicted criminal, and it talks about his path actions. It's kind of fun to put these characters side by side and juxtapose them, because Partitio, the merchant, can buy items off of NPCs as one of his path actions and things like that, where Osvald just either steals or fights them. So it kind of puts them at odds on that. There is a little bit of gameplay once this footage introduces the two characters. There's a little bit of footage just about features of the game. It talks about the seafaring, where you get your own ship and being able to travel across the world map. It hints at a little bit of light customization on your ferry vessel. And then it also talks about latent abilities, which, based on my perception, look like limit breaks or overdrives or whatever you call them, where different characters will build up a meter as they break enemies or take damage and activate different special abilities as they're in battle. So that's kind of fun. That I believe, I don't recall a similar system in the first game.
No, it's
So it seems like it's kind of new.
Mhm.
Yeah, so this is just a good trailer in general. Showing a lot of the games, and I'm feeling a lot of the excitement for Octopath Traveler 2 now that I did for 1 back when HD2D was a novel thing and we hadn't seen this sort of game. Now it's like we've seen a few different publishers, a few different developers either use the HD2D style specifically or emulate the style in different ways. So Octopath Traveler 2 doesn't have that kind of novel feeling anymore. But after watching this trailer, I'm feeling some of the same excitement that I did for the original game, which is good. So this, out of all the packed releases of February, this is probably the one that I'm going to make sure that I prioritize over all the other things that are releasing around the same time.
Yeah, I'm pretty interested in because a lot of the novelty and charm of the first Octopath Traveler is obviously the HD2D style is very new, and looking back on it, obviously since more and more releases have been using that style, like Live Alive, the Octopath mobile game, Triangle Strategy, and so forth. After seeing the steady advancements of it through these titles, looking back on that game, it's it's kind of quote unquote basic looking now compared to the other titles. So I know a lot. The development team of Octopath 2 really wants to, showcase these advancements in HD2D style and kick it up to the next level. I'm very interested to see how that manifests in this game because they want to take all the lessons they've learned from HD2D over the years and implement them into this game and plus more. And I think one of the early showings of that is when they encounter a really big shark as you're traversing through the world on the boat, and having an interesting turn-based encounter of your party members are on the boat versus this shark that's coming out of the water, and seeing that manifest and how the battle dynamics go in that fight. And I think that's a really cool way to showcase that. So I'm really hoping that this game kind of ushers in a new era of we think of HD2D as something that's obviously it's harking back to that SNES era style sprite based RPGs, but more refined in the kind of coming more alive in a way, in a more modernized way. And I'm really hoping that this game kind of advances in a new era of it's more than just that. It's more of a, because I think a lot of people are starting to get tired of HD2D. I've seen that sentiment over the past few releases, and I can understand that sentiment. So I'm hoping this game reinvigorates that style in a new, exciting way.
In a lot of ways, it feels like Octopath Traveler 2 is set up to reach kind of the missed opportunity that the first game didn't quite reach, which I actually think is fine because we got Octopath Traveler a few years back, and a lot of the other games that have either specifically been in that style or have emulated it, I'm thinking the Aiden Chronicle 100 Heroes, not HD2D, but has a very similar style. We've seen a few indie games kind of emulate the style as well, and hell, even the official Speaking in Remaster announced during TGS kind of in the same space as well. So I still think there's a lot of, let me forget Dragon Quest III Remake. We haven't heard a lot of details on that in a while, but specifically in the HD2D style. So I do think that we're going to be seeing a lot of this, and maybe Octopath Traveler as the pilot of that whole, it's not a genre, but that styling didn't quite reach the heights that maybe people expected. But Octopath Traveler 2, I think, is well poised to kind of act as a correction factor on that. And we've already seen how they have the paths that cross for specific stories in a way to kind of correct on that shortcoming of the first game. You have already mentioned how it seems like it'd be a visual step up and be more fully realized. So I'm excited for Octopath Traveler 2. The second game in any perspective series is where we often have the chance to see, a lot of these improvements made in a significant way. So it's something that I think that Octopath Traveler 2 is really well positioned to. Obviously, it's yet to see if it hits it, if it nails the landing. But I think it's in a really good position to do just that.
I think like one of the ways like it manifests in like in Octopath 2 already is when you did some of the latent abilities, you see like the camera choreography, shifting up, like when Hikari does his camera or his latent ability, like the camera like swoops around behind his back. So you see a different perspective of like the pixel sprite, as he's doing that animation. So I'm hoping like they kind of like, they really have fun with the camera choreography in this game and make it more like dynamic. And so it's there's a lot of like opportunities and potential in this game. I'm hoping I really want to like believe in this case because I know a lot of people like kind of as time has gone on, they've kind of felt sour about Octopath as a series, and I understand it, and I definitely agree to some extent. So, I think the one major shortcoming with Octopath 2 is how they've reused like the exact same classes in this game. So I'm hoping, there's it kind of feels like a more of a missed opportunity, and like you could have gone a totally different direction, but I can understand it in a certain sense as well. So hopefully like the battle dynamics aren't so like trending the same water as the first Octopath did, because they've already kind of like have a lot to prove, especially with using the same exact like jobs and classes as the main Octopath 1 cast already.
Yeah,
So
well,
we'll see.
it's hard to see. It's based on the footage that we have so far. It's hard to see exactly how that will be addressed. We know that everyone's got two path actions now. We talked about the new latent powers that are an addition. So it's possible that we'll see some more different ways that even though they've used the same titles of classes, that they might be implemented slightly differently. And maybe they're using the titles just to make it feel contiguous between the two games. But I do agree that it was kind of, it feels a bit manufactured where it's like, oh, this character is the merchant now. This character is the scholar now. This character is the hunter now, rather than just having 8 different classes. Because before it felt like the classes were just kind of tied to the character and what they were. Like Tressa is the daughter of merchant, so she's the merchant or whatever. Or Ulberich is the warrior. I forget the exact class name. But now that they're just reusing those same titles in the second game, it feels a little bit more contrived. But
Yeah.
I'm still holding a hope that they'll do something within the game framework itself where, yeah, they might use the same title, but they've implemented it in a different way, or they have something specific to these new characters, so they're not just beholden to the template set by the first game. But it remains to be seen. But I kind of agree that I see where you're coming from with that sentiment. The other major, even calling it a major headline is not quite true, but we kind of have an announcement of an announcement from this week. So across a few different publications this week, we got a little bit of insight about the upcoming Final Fantasy XVI, which we recently talked about how with the new trailer is coming out next summer. Yoshi P and the team over at Square Enix has basically made an announcement of an announcement that we will know the release date of Final Fantasy XVI before the end of this year. So within the next 2 months, we will dial it down from summer 2023 to a specific release date. And we also got a few nuggets about the state of development, how the percentage that they're throwing around is 95%, that the development progress is basically done. They're doing debugging. They're doing there are some cheeky lines about the state of the sound optimization, working with Soken, of course, from Final Fantasy XIV fame, of finishing out all the sound design and all the work on that front. So I don't know how much we can extract from this announcement of an announcement, but it kind of feels like where for some of the previous Final Fantasy games in the main series, their development just kind of lingered on and on and on, where this game, it felt like it had a much more standard marketing cycle where it was initially announced. We had a bit of a lull. We got a couple trailers in a row, and now it seems like we're going to get a release date relatively soon after the big blowout trailer from last month.
Yeah, I assume this will be like a Game Awards announcement. That's the only like upcoming like
that's a good. I didn't think of that.
Related event, so that's like early December. So
we'll
most likely be there. From the sound of things, I mean, sure. It's about time we got a release date on this, even though it's still a bit far out. And I do, like you mentioned, like the development cycle of this game is much more stable than FF15 was, thankfully. A lot of lessons learned from that, obviously with the new development team on this. It's I really hope it's a good game. I really hope that I really wonder what they'll do about the PS5 exclusive situation, because I know that like there was some talk of like whether is this going to come out on PC, and if it does, will it be at the same time as the PS5? Because it might be like let's say like a Silent Hill 2 remake situation where like they're primarily marketing it on PS5, but maybe PS5 is like maybe potentially a console exclusive, and it'll eventually come to PC same day. We don't exactly know yet, obviously. But hopefully, like I do want to see a simultaneous PC release for this as well, because I just I want to see it running like at the full power of my PC.
Unfortunately, Square Enix has just been there. We've talked about this in the past. There is no rhyme or reason to the way Square Enix does things.
Yes.
Like, I'll just go ahead and kind of fold in the next discussion topic, and that's Forspoken, which is a release for early next year that is also a PlayStation 5 console exclusive, but is launching on the PC at the same time, which that was not something that was always known. We kind of knew that it was going to have a PC release, but how it would coincide with the console release or come in later wasn't originally something that was that clear. But for instance, in Forspoken's case, it's coming out on all the PC storefronts at the same time, where for games like Neo, The World Ends With You, or Final Fantasy VII Remake, that wasn't the case. Kingdom Hearts is still only on one storefront and just came out of nowhere on PC, and there's no rhyme or reason for Square Enix. Every single title you have to treat as a separate individual event. You can't look at trends. You can't look at like anything.
Octopath Traveler 1 is on Xbox and not PlayStation, but Octopath
Yep, that's another
Traveler 2 will be,
It's just a wild ride. It's just a wild ride.
So depending on what game you look at, what are our expectations for Final Fantasy 16 on PC? The honest answer is who the hell knows, because you could look at other titles in Square Enix's catalog and come up with all sorts of answers. We don't know. But on the Forspoken front, we talked about how they're going into... So this game is only a couple months away. It's releasing in January. And we talked about how they released the first of 3 deep dive videos specifically focused on gameplay mechanics over the next couple months. Last time we had the traversal magic. We talked about the shimmy and the platforming and things like that. This week, the deep dive 2 is all about magic combat, which I think is kind of broad because isn't that the entire game's combat is magic combat? But it'll be interesting to see what the third deep dive ends up being. So this deep dive video, again, compared to all the other Forspoken marketing, I actually think is relatively good. It's mostly just a narrator going through what Frey's abilities are and going through the different types of magic. They kind of explicitly color the magic, like literally, like it talks about how she starts out with purple magic, which looks like it's like earth or ground focused, goes into red magic fire, introduces briefly green and blue, talks about how some of the magic is offensively based, some of it's more supporty or healy, and a pretty detailed trailer. And one thing that I actually do appreciate about this deep dive trailer is that I have talked about in the past how some trailers go overboard trying to make them as cinematic as possible. Like they'll take free control of the camera and they'll use like angles and sweeping motions that aren't actually available in game. Where in this Forspoken deep dive magic combat video, they might do a little bit of that, but a lot of it is literally just slowing the animations down. Which actually, to me, I think it's really, there's a lot of slow-mo, but not in the sense of trying to make it like an action movie trailer, but it almost is just showing that they're proud of the work they've done with the animations and the particle effects and things like that, and they want to show it off. And I don't know, I think it's pretty brave that they're saying like, yeah, take a deep look at what we've made, where we'll slow it down for you. Like we're not going to try to hide it or like gussy it up in a way. So I actually think I kind of applaud them for that. They're saying, look, this is the spell effects that we've got in the game. Take a look at them, where we worked hard on these. And I think it looks pretty good. I don't know that I'm feeling super high on it, but I am feeling more optimistic on Forspoken now in these last 2 trailers than I have been when they were doing like their initial marketing over the summer with the more story focused stuff. So I'm guessing this will be a game where I really enjoy the exploration, the combat, the open world, but the story, based on everything they've shown, I probably won't be too tied into, but I don't need that to enjoy a game personally. So these last 2 trailers, I'm just being honest and saying, we've had, like Alex wrote up on the site, some things about how Forspoken was not marketed well early in his opinion, and I think the tack that they've been taking the last couple months has made me more personally excited for this game. So I'm looking forward to this in January of next year.
Yeah, they delayed the game so they can market it better. No,
I
I'm
mean,
just kidding about that. I mean,
valid.
that's not the real reason, obviously. But
Wasn't this game originally supposed to release in January of this year? Was that true? Am I making that up? I feel like it was supposed to release a long time ago.
That's probably somewhat true. Let me go check real fast. It was supposed to launch in May. Yeah, May of this year. It was initially May, then it got delayed to October, then it got delayed to January. So.
Oh, back when it was Project Athia, I think people were scouring like footnotes on trailers, and at some point it said January. Oh yeah, Sony CES presentation dates Project Athia for January 2022. Okay, so they were a year off, but it's I don't know. It needed a little bit more time in the oven, and based on the gameplay we've seen for the last two showcases, I'm feeling pretty optimistic about it.
Yeah, I just hope it runs well on PC, and I'm sure it'll be actually like super fun to play.
All right, and to wrap up this podcast, we've only got a few more headlines here. These are mostly just release dates or release windows. In the next week, we've got a couple games coming out, ports of existing games, one of which is Kowloon High School Chronicle. This is the visual novel, correct, that originally released on Switch last February, and then originally came out on the PlayStation 4. Not last February, 2 Februarys ago, February 2021, and then came out in March on PlayStation 4. It's getting a PC port next week. So Kowloon High School Chronicle is launching for Steam on November 10th.
Yeah, this was originally released on PS2 like in 2004. It was like published by
I meant the English releases.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, there's the updated ports, obviously, updated re-release.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying, like originally, that it originally came out, so it's not like a brand new game. It's but it's a neat second adventure RPG dungeon crawler type deal. So
it's really cool.
I've only
played a little bit of it on Switch. I've been meaning to get back to it. Maybe
it's just so crowded. Like once again, the last 2 months, it's like, especially like November, we usually take this time to kind of catch up on like things we want to like mention for
try to catch up. We make the attempt.
Yeah.
Well, and then going the other direction, a game that released earlier on PC that is now making its way to console is Kaiju Wars. We talked about this very briefly at one of our summer episodes of the podcast. It released on PC back in April. It is getting a PlayStation and Xbox console release also on November 10th. There's a Switch release, I think, in the works, but we don't have a specific date for it quite yet. But going from PC over to console for Kaiju Wars on the same day as the PC release of Kowloon High School Chronicle. We also got a release date for the first Front Mission remake on Switch. So Front Mission First Remake. We knew it was coming out in November, but we have the release date that is just going to squeeze in at the end of the month. Front Mission First Remake will launch on Nintendo Switch on November 30th.
It would be technically eligible for that Game of the Year podcast just by a day.
Yep.
If it was like, depending on when we decide to record that podcast and so forth. So that's something I really want to, I need to squeeze before that podcast, because it would technically be eligible if it was like, because I love the first Front Mission. So, it'd be, they didn't lie. They said it would come out in November, even if it's like the last week of November.
And the last headline we have here is that the first-person RPG Atomic Heart is releasing in February of next year. Surprise. On February 21st, 2023. We discussed this on, I think, our very first September edition of the Tetracast this year. It is a Russian-focused, it's a Russian-developed game. It's a first-person RPG. But alongside this release date announcement for February 21st, we got some new gameplay footage, including, I believe, IGN has an exclusive 10-minute boss fight footage. And I will be honest, everything about this game, it's being published by Focus Entertainment. That was announced back in September. The developer is Mundfish. And the recent marketing for this game has held on to calling it an action RPG. But I will say that any of the footage, unless there's something tucked away on a Facebook page or something, none of the footage that I've seen for this game really showcases anything RPG. I mean, it looks like a first-person shooter, and it looks fine. And some of the footage that they've shown, I mean, it kind of looks like what I would expect an action game with kind of some sort of sci-fi aesthetics would look like. But it's just interesting to see a lot of this marketing specifically calling it an RPG. Then I just don't quite see it yet. But of course, we only can see what the trailers show us. It'll be interesting to follow up on this next year. But also, I remember when this release date for February was first announced, Adam literally replied like, "Good thing nothing else is releasing in February." Obviously, very cheekily, of course. So I'm guessing if we do focus on this game next year, it'll probably be after the fact, just because February is absolutely loaded. Plus, this game, despite having a decent amount of gameplay footage for Atomic Heart, I still don't quite have a good feel for what it is, especially for like how it really ties into the genre. But maybe that's left to be seen. So next year, we'll keep an eye on Atomic Heart and see if it's something that we think it truly is up our alley. And I don't know, maybe we'll make time to take a look at it if it's something that we really think we can kind of look at a different sort of game that's still in our coverage space. And I know that was kind of a shorter list than normal, but that's kind of what we've got for this week of the podcast. So most of the announcements or things that are coming up is basically looking at Adam's 2022 release calendar as we look into the middle third of November and seeing all the stuff that's coming out. We've already kind of listed a lot of them here, but basically a lot of what we're looking forward to is basically games are releasing, not least of which Pokemon in 2 weeks, and a few other games around the same time. Pentiment from Obsidian's coming out. We have a few other games that we talked about in late November. We've got the Front Mission remake. I still have to finish Divine Force and all the other games from late in the year that we're trying to squeeze in before deliberations at the end of the year. So those are sort of the things to look forward to in the next episode of the podcast as embargoes release, as people get time to look at games like Harvestella and give impressions on those, and try to wrap up as we go into the end of the year deliberations and see exactly where all these things end up stacking up from the course of the whole year. But as we wrap up, I will remind once again that we have those 3 features up on the site for the Final Fantasy XIV variant dungeon feature, James's feature about looking ahead for The Legend of Nayuta Boundless Trails, as well as the Star Ocean, The Divine Force interview answers. I believe we're still planning to have an official review up on the site within the next week. Is that true, Adam? Do you know?
Probably.
Yeah, and is Scott handling that?
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting because we've talked about, because I've played a little bit of it. James has played a little bit of it. Josh has played all of it. And I know Adam's planning to get to it. But we don't have Scott on this podcast regularly. So I'll be interested to see like what his like uncompromised take is on Star Ocean: The Divine Force, and to see if he feels as strongly as we do about it or not. So it'll be interesting to kind of compare and contrast how we felt about that game on the podcast versus what actually gets published on the site. But you know, the opinions are reviews are personal opinions at the end of the day when you boil it completely down. So whatever he comes up with is valid, and I'm eager to read it once it goes up on the site. And of course, once it does, we will go ahead and point you guys to it once it's published. So thank you so much for listening. We will be back next week as we look into some of the games that are releasing in mid-November. You can follow all of RPG Site's work on most of the social media platforms, primarily Twitter for the moment. Just search for RPG Site on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, or Instagram, and you can find us on those. We do also have a Discord server. You can hit the link at the top of the homepage or go to discord.gg/RPG Site. If you do listen to this podcast on any of the podcast services on Spotify, on Apple, Google, or even on YouTube or on our site, go ahead and give us a review or a comment if you'd like. We love reading those. Let us know what we're doing well or what we could be doing better. And we'll be back next week with another episode of the Tetracast. I know this week was maybe a little bit shorter, but there's a lot on the horizon, a lot to get to try to squeeze in before the end of the year. So look forward to that as we reconvene in 7 days. But until next time, stay safe and take care. And we'll talk to you then.
Tactics Ogre next week.
Sonic.
Ooh.
Sonic.